Bank manager throws black CEO's mom's ID on the floor, instantly loses $5 billion deal. Clara Simmons had worked tirelessly to get to where she was. As the CEO of a fast-growing tech company, she had proven time and again that she belonged at the top of the corporate world. But it hadn't been easy. Clara had fought through countless barriers, most of them invisible but all of them real. The fact that she was black, a woman, and young made her journey even more difficult, but it also made her more determined. Her mother, Marlene Simmons, had been there for every step, guiding her, supporting her, and encouraging her to keep going, no matter the obstacles. Today, however, was different. Clara had secured an opportunity to close a monumental deal with one of the biggest banks in the country. This deal could change everything for her company, pushing it into the stratosphere of Silicon Valley's elite. It wasn't just the money at stake, it was her chance to prove that someone like her could succeed on the biggest stage. The meeting was set. Clara walked into the bank's sleek, glass-paneled headquarters with her mother at her side. Marlene, though not as involved in Clara's business dealings, was an essential part of her life. She had always been a constant, even when Clara's colleagues and investors tried to dismiss her as just the mother. Clara wanted her there today. She needed her there, not just as a reminder of where she came from, but also as a symbol of the strength that had gotten her this far. The bank's manager, William Grant, was a seasoned professional with decades of experience under his belt. He was well known in the financial world for his calm demeanor and his ability to close complex deals. But today, something was different. Clara could feel the tension in the air as they were ushered into the conference room, where the deal would finally be signed. William Grant, standing tall behind a long conference table, gave a brief handshake to Clara and her mother, who had followed her daughter into the room. The mood was tense. It wasn't that anyone had said anything wrong yet. It was the unspoken pressure of millions of dollars hanging in the balance, the weight of their futures, and the strange dynamic between Clara, the woman who had built something incredible from nothing, and William, the man who held the key to her success. There was an edge in the room, but no one dared acknowledge it just yet. The negotiations started off as they always did, with pleasantries and formalities. William sat at the head of the table, a professional smile on his face, while Clara sat across from him, exuding confidence and quiet strength. Her mother, Marlene, sat at her side, observing the proceedings with her usual quiet dignity. The details of the deal were straightforward: investment, terms, timelines. But there was one important piece of business left to settle: identification. Marlene, who wasn't as familiar with corporate processes, handed over a crucial document, a government-issued ID required for verification purposes. She did so with the elegance that only a mother with years of wisdom could carry, passing the ID to William with a calm gesture. But what happened next would set the stage for everything that followed. William took the document, his fingers brushing the edges of it, but his expression shifted. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly as he inspected the ID. It was just a momentary hesitation, but Clara noticed it instantly. William's eyes flicked up to meet hers and then back down to the document. He frowned, his mouth turning into a subtle grimace as if he had seen something he didn't like. Without a word, he took the ID and without thinking tossed it onto the floor beside the table. It wasn't a hard toss, but it wasn't a respectful handling either. It was careless. It was dismissive. It was rude. Clara's blood went cold. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Her eyes locked on the ID, now lying face-up on the polished wooden floor, its corners crumpled from the impact. It was an insignificant thing to most people, just a piece of plastic. But to Clara and to her mother it represented so much more. It was a symbol of all the years of hard work, the sacrifices made, the battles fought, and the struggles overcome. Marlene, her face still calm but her eyes flashing with disbelief, didn't move at first. It was as though the act of tossing the ID on the floor had stunned her into silence. Clara, however, was already rising from her chair. The air in the room felt thick with tension. No one spoke, but the silence was deafening. Clara took a deep breath and walked over to the ID. Without a word, she bent down, picked it up, and slowly placed it back onto the table. Her hand was steady, her gaze unwavering as she met William Grant's eyes. She didn't say anything at first, but the message was clear. She wasn't going to let this disrespect go unnoticed. This wasn't just about an ID. It was about the way William had just treated her mother, about the way he had treated her. It was a reminder of the biases that had followed her throughout her career, the assumptions made about her worth because of the color of her skin, and the role she played as a woman in a male-dominated industry. For a moment the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. William, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, cleared his throat awkwardly, but Clara was already speaking. "I expect more respect than that," she said, her voice cold but firm. Her eyes were locked on his, her shoulders squared. "This is not how we do things." William opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to explain himself, but the words caught in his throat. He had no idea what to say. In that moment his calm and composed facade cracked, and the cracks were widening fast. Clara turned back to the table, a slight tremor of anger behind her professional demeanor, and sat down. She glanced at her mother, whose eyes were still on the table, but there was a faint, approving smile on her lips. Marlene didn't need to say anything. Clara knew that her mother had her back, as she always had. William finally spoke, but his words were hesitant, unsure. I apologize if I've caused any offense. That was not my intention." Clara nodded once, her gaze still sharp. "Intentions don't always matter. Actions do." And with that, the room shifted again. The deal was no longer just about numbers and signatures. It was about respect. And Clara wasn't about to let that be undermined by anyone, no matter how powerful or influential they might be. The stakes had just risen, and everything was about to change. The air in the room grew thicker after Clara's words, and for a long moment no one knew how to respond. William Grant sat there, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment, unsure of what had just happened. Clara, however, was calm, her demeanor unchanged as she locked eyes with him. It was a power move, one that most people in her position would have been too nervous to execute, but Clara had learned the hard way not to let things like this slide. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or mistreated because of who they were. Her mother, Marlene, had taught her to stand tall in moments like these, to never back down when someone tried to undermine her worth. Marlene had always been the quiet one, the steady force who had shown Clara the value of resilience. And now, as Clara stood there, she felt that resilience surging within her. She wasn't going to let this man, the man who was supposed to be a professional, disrespect her mother in that way, not in her presence, not in front of everyone. William shifted in his seat, and the weight of the moment finally hit him. He knew he had made a mistake. He had known it as soon as the ID left his hand and landed with a small thud on the floor. But he had been so preoccupied with his own stress over the deal, his own anxiety about the investment, that he had allowed himself to be careless. It wasn't the first time he'd been dismissive in his career, but this was different. This was a woman who had earned everything she had, who had fought tooth and nail to get to where she was. And now here he was, throwing away something as simple and important as a mother's ID, treating her as though she were inconsequential. He opened his mouth again, but this time his words were shaky. "I truly didn't mean to offend you, Clara. I'm just a little on edge with all that's riding on this deal." Clara held up her hand, cutting him off. She didn't need to hear any more excuses. She had been through too much in her life to let someone try to brush this off with an apology that didn't come from the heart. The deal could wait, but respect couldn't. "Do you understand why that matters to me?" Clara asked, her voice steady but firm. "It's not just a piece of paper, William. It's not just about the paperwork or the deal. It's about the way we treat people, especially people who are here to build something, to create something meaningful." William blinked, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what he was hearing. He had been so wrapped up in the potential benefits of the investment, the pressure of the numbers, that he had forgotten the human element of the equation. It wasn't just about securing a massive deal. It was about making sure that everyone involved, especially Clara and her mother, felt seen, heard, and respected. "I see," William said, his voice quieter now. "I understand, I really do, and again I apologize for my behavior." But Clara wasn't so quick to accept. She didn't want a simple apology. Apologies were easy, they could be said without meaning, without change. Clara needed more than that. She needed to see that William and the bank he represented truly understood what was at stake here, beyond the financials, beyond the business deals. It was about something deeper. "You don't just get to apologize, William," Clara said, her tone now more direct. "You need to understand that this isn't about a single mistake. This is about how we, as Black professionals are constantly forced to prove ourselves, to prove that we belong in these spaces. Every time something like this happens, it chips away at our sense of worth, and I won't let you diminish that. The silence in the room was deafening. William sat back, processing her words, feeling the weight of them settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a wake-up call for him. It was a lesson. He had been so used to power, so used to sitting at the top of the financial world, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly understand people, to consider their perspectives. Clara, meanwhile, was fighting to keep her emotions in check. She had always known that her success would be met with resistance, but moments like this still stung. It wasn't easy to watch someone look down on her mother, someone who had supported Clara since the very beginning. Clara had built her empire from the ground up, faced every kind of challenge imaginable, but the thought that someone might think less of her because of her background or her mother's background was a different kind of pain. "I'm not here to lecture you, William," Clara continued, her voice still calm but unwavering. "But you need to understand that actions like yours don't go unnoticed. They're not just going to be forgotten because you say sorry. People like me, people like my mother, deserve respect, not just in meetings like this, but everywhere we go." Marlene, who had been silent throughout most of the conversation, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years of wisdom. "It's not just about today, William. It's about all the times we've had to fight for recognition, for respect, and to prove that we're worthy. Clara has fought her whole life to get to this point. We all have." Clara smiled at her mother, a smile that was equal parts gratitude and pride. Marlene had never been the outspoken one, but her words carried the kind of quiet power that Clara had always admired. Marlene knew what it meant to face prejudice and still rise above it. She knew what it meant to be ignored and still keep fighting. William's face softened, and for the first time in the conversation, he seemed to understand the depth of the situation. "I'm sorry, I really didn't think about it like that." Clara stood tall. "I'm glad you're beginning to understand, but I'm not sure I can proceed with this deal if I can't trust that the people I'm working with understand the value of respect and integrity." The room was still. No one moved. William sat in silence, realizing that the next words he said would either make or break this moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with a sense of realization. "Clara," he said, "I get it now, and I want to make this right. If you're willing to continue, I'll do everything I can to prove that this won't happen again. You deserve the respect, and your mother deserves the respect. I'm committed to making sure that's clear from here on out." Clara didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She just nodded once slowly, letting his words sink in. The ball was now in her court. She had the power. The choice was hers to make. After a moment she spoke, her tone measured but resolute. "We'll continue, but I need to know that this respect will be present at all levels. That means from this point forward, we handle everything with the care and consideration it deserves." And with that, the room shifted again. The deal wasn't finalized yet, but the dynamics had already changed. Clara had made her point clear. This wasn't just business anymore. It was about respect, about recognition, and about making sure that no one, no matter who they were or where they came from, would ever have to feel dismissed or undervalued. The silence that followed Clara's words hung heavy in the air, as though the entire room had taken a collective breath. William Grant's face had softened, his earlier bravado gone. Clara had made her stance clear, and now there was nothing left to do but wait and see if William would follow through on his words. The tension was palpable, and Clara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just another business meeting. It was a test, one that could define not just the deal at hand, but her future dealings in this world of high-stakes finance. She wasn't about to let her mother or herself be treated as anything less than equal to anyone else in that room. And now she was faced with a choice. Should she continue with the deal, despite the moment of disrespect, or should she walk away? Clara glanced over at her mother, who was sitting quietly, still observing the situation with that calm demeanor she had always worn. Marlene's eyes met Clara's, and for a moment they shared a silent understanding. There were no words needed between them. Marlene knew how much this deal meant to Clara, but she also knew the deeper principle behind this moment, the principle of standing up for what is right. Clara had always been fiercely protective of her mother, who had sacrificed so much for her. It wasn't just about being a CEO today, it was about the long journey that had brought her to this point. The moments of doubt, The late nights working in silence, knowing that each step forward had to be earned. Her mother had taught her how to keep going, how to push through obstacles, how to rise above when the world seemed stacked against her. Clara's eyes lingered on the ID now resting on the table. The way William had tossed it aside had felt like more than a small mistake. It had felt like a dismissal of everything she had worked for, everything her mother had worked for. She took a deep breath and turned her attention back to William, who was sitting stiffly, clearly struggling to find the right words. His earlier apology had seemed sincere, but Clara wasn't sure if he truly understood the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just about him being careless. It was about the environment he represented, the institution he worked for. Clara knew that if she didn't stand firm here, she might have to fight the same battles again and again. But if she stood her ground, if she took control of this moment, it could change everything. William finally spoke again, this time with more thought in his voice. Clara, I know that the deal is important. It's not just business for you, it's personal. I should have thought about that before I acted the way I did. I can't undo what happened, but I can promise you that I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Clara nodded, but she wasn't quite ready to let him off the hook. She had heard apologies before. She had heard many empty promises from people who didn't truly understand the impact of their actions. This needed to be different. She needed to know that William truly got it, truly understood why this wasn't just about a single incident, but about the larger systematic issues that she and others like her had faced time and time again. Words are easy, William, she said softly, but actions. Actions speak louder. I need you to show me that you understand. I need to know that the people I work with, people who represent such a powerful institution, respect me, respect my mother, and respect the journey it's taken to get here. The room grew even quieter. Clara's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable authority behind it. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She wasn't asking for a handout. She was asking for respect, and she wouldn't settle for anything less. William seemed to take a long moment to process what she had said. He shifted in his seat, his hands now clasped in front of him as if he were trying to gather himself, to figure out how to move forward. It was clear that the weight of the conversation had finally sunk in. This was not just about a failed gesture. It was about acknowledging the layers of history, the expectations, and the biases that came with being a black woman in a room full of powerful people who often didn't think twice about their actions. I understand, he said slowly, meeting Clara's gaze. I've always prided myself on being professional, on treating everyone with respect. But I realize now that I've failed to live up to that standard, and I can only ask for the chance to make it right. Clara regarded him silently for a moment. She wasn't sure if he fully understood the depth of his mistake, but she could see that he was at least trying. And for the first time since the incident, Clara began to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this moment could lead to something better. She wasn't ready to trust him completely, but she was willing to give him the opportunity to prove that he had learned something from this. Her decision was made. All right, Clara said firmly, her voice steady. We'll continue with the deal, but know this, I'm watching. If you or anyone else involved can't respect me and my company the way we deserve, we'll walk away. I'm not here for empty gestures. I'm here to do business on my terms, and that means respect for everyone, no exceptions. Marlene, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up, her voice gentle but filled with a quiet strength. We appreciate your honesty, William. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong, but it's the first step toward making things right. William nodded, a small sigh escaping him as if he had been holding his breath. I will make sure that you feel respected every step of the way, Clara. I give you my word. Clara nodded in return, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. The deal wasn't signed yet, but the conversation had taken a turn. The power dynamic had shifted slightly. William might not have fully understood before, but Clara could see that he was beginning to realize the consequences of his actions. That alone gave her hope. The meeting continued, but Clara was no longer as focused on the details of the contract as she had been before. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to the exchange, to the quiet but powerful moment of standing her ground. She had not let the moment slip by. She had taken control when it mattered most. As the discussions moved forward, Clara felt a sense of clarity. The deal would go through, but the respect she had demanded would be non-negotiable. She wasn't just closing a business deal anymore. She was shaping how future business would be done. and she would never allow herself or anyone else to be treated as less than they deserved again. The next few moments felt like a turning point. The air had shifted from tense to purposeful, but Clara could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. She wasn't just here to sign a deal. She wasn't just here to secure a massive financial investment for her company. She was here to make a statement. A statement about respect, about her worth, about the value of standing tall in the face of disrespect, no matter who it came from. Clara had always known that getting to this level, this high-stakes corporate world, would require more than just hard work. It would require resilience in the face of doubt, strength in the face of adversity, and sometimes a calm forcefulness in the face of blatant disrespect. Today, she had been forced to show just how far she was willing to go. She wasn't about to let anyone undermine the years of effort that had brought her here. The meeting had returned to its formalities, the negotiations moving forward, but Clara's mind was no longer solely focused on the deal. It had become about something much deeper. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, every decision made from this point forward would carry the weight of that initial disrespect. The moment when William had tossed her mother's ID onto the floor. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making sure the people she worked with, no matter how powerful, understood that she wasn't just another businesswoman. She was a woman who commanded respect, who demanded dignity, and who would never, ever be treated like anything less. William Grant, meanwhile, seemed to have undergone a subtle shift in his demeanor. He had begun to speak with more thoughtfulness, more awareness of his position, and more sensitivity to Clara's words. But Clara wasn't fooled. She knew this change wasn't an overnight transformation. It was the result of being confronted with something he hadn't truly considered before, the reality of how his actions, even in small moments, could carry a ripple effect far beyond what he had initially realized. It wasn't just about being nice or apologizing. It was about truly understanding the impact of his behavior and whether he was willing to hold himself accountable. The deal was still being discussed, but Clara's focus remained sharp. She was listening more closely to every word William spoke, every change in tone, every look that passed between the other parties involved in the negotiation. She wasn't going to let anything slide now, not after what had happened. But there was something else simmering beneath the surface, something that had been building ever since the day she started her company, the pressure of proving herself. In the tech world and in the business world at large, there were always whispers. Whispers that Clara hadn't truly earned her place. Whispers that she was only here because of a few lucky breaks or because she had played the right cards. Clara had spent years proving those whispers wrong. And now, as she sat across from William Grant and his colleagues, she was more determined than ever to shut those whispers down once and for all. This deal wasn't just about the future of her company. It was about silencing those doubts, about showing that she was here to stay, that her success was not a fluke, and that her place in the room was as hard-earned as anyone else's. For a moment, she caught her mother's eye again. Marlene, as always, remained calm, but Clara could see the pride in her eyes. It was the same pride she had seen in her mother's gaze when Clara had first told her she was starting her own company, when she had made her first big pitch, when she had landed her first major deal. Marlene had always believed in her, even when the world hadn't. And now, as Clara sat at that conference table, she could feel that belief in her mother's gaze. It was as if her mother was saying, "You've got this. You've earned this." William, now more aware of the weight of Clara's words, had returned to his notes, his pen poised over the contract. But Clara's mind was still racing. She needed this deal, but she also needed something more. She needed to see that the people she worked with were more than just investors. She needed to know they could stand with her in the hard moments, not just when the numbers looked good, but when things got complicated, when challenges arose, and when the stakes were higher than ever. As the discussion moved into the final terms of the deal, Clara's thoughts remained focused. William was trying to regain his composure, his earlier slip-up still lingering between them. But as he spoke, Clara could see that he was no longer the confident, unshakable banker he had been at the beginning of the meeting. He was different now. He was cautious. He was aware. And that, Clara realized, was exactly what she needed. She needed him to be aware. To understand that this wasn't just about financials or business strategy. It was about respect. It was about ensuring that when people like her walked into a room, they weren't treated like they were there to prove themselves. She had spent her whole life proving herself. And now all she wanted was to be seen for who she was, someone who deserved a seat at the table, not because of her gender or the color of her skin, but because of what she had built. William finally looked up from the contract and met Clara's eyes again. "Clara, I want to make this right," he said, his voice quieter, now more sincere. "I know I've made mistakes and I won't pretend that I can undo them, but I can promise you this. The way I handle things moving forward, the way I treat you and your company will be different. I respect what you've built, I respect who you are, and I want to make sure that everyone involved in this deal knows that." Clara studied him for a moment. She didn't trust him completely, not yet, but there was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. A willingness to listen, a willingness to change. She could work with that. "All right, William," Clara said, her voice calm but resolute. "Let's move forward, but understand that respect is not negotiable. It's not just something I expect from you, it's something I expect from everyone involved in this deal. If we're going to make this work, we all need to be on the same page, and that means treating each other as equals, no matter who we are or where we come from." Marlene nodded in agreement, offering Clara a smile of approval. Clara knew that the deal was far from over, but something had changed in that room, something important. The balance of power had shifted. William might not have fully understood the gravity of his actions at first, but he was beginning to. And Clara knew that, for the first time, she had taken control of the situation in a way that would shape the way business was done moving forward. The meeting continued, but now the negotiations felt different. Clara felt different. She was no longer just sitting at the table, hoping to secure a deal. She was standing up for herself, for her company, and for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. And that, Clara realized, was the real victory. As the meeting progressed, Clara could feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The pressure was still there, but it was no longer the same kind of oppressive tension that had filled the room when the incident with the ID had occurred. William seemed more aware now, more cautious in his words and actions, as if the gravity of the situation had finally hit him. Clara had made it clear that respect was non-negotiable, and she wasn't going to let anyone forget it. The deal itself was a complicated one, several moving parts, all intricately tied together. There were terms to negotiate, clauses to finalize, and timelines to agree upon. But Clara wasn't focused solely on the business side of things anymore. Her mind kept drifting back to the conversation they had just had, the way William had listened to her, and the way he had acknowledged his mistake. She wasn't sure if it would stick, if he would truly follow through on his promise, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like her voice had been heard. Marlene sat beside her, quiet as always, but Clara could feel her support. Her mother hadn't spoken much during the negotiations, but her presence was a reminder of everything that had brought Clara here. The long nights, the sacrifices, the struggles that had seemed insurmountable at times. Marlene had always been her anchor, steady and unwavering. Now, as Clara sat at that table, surrounded by men in suits and power brokers, she felt her mother's quiet strength behind her. "Clara," William's voice broke through her thoughts, bringing her back to the room. "I want to make sure we're aligned on the final terms. I don't want there to be any misunderstandings moving forward." Clara met his gaze, her expression steady. "We're aligned," she replied, her tone clear. "But I need to make sure that your team understands the stakes here. This isn't just about a contract. It's about building a long-term partnership, one that's built on trust and mutual respect." William nodded, his eyes flicking to the other men at the table. He looked almost resigned, as if he realized he couldn't take shortcuts anymore. For the first time, Clara saw a hint of vulnerability in him, a man who was no longer the confident, untouchable figure he had been when they first met. This man was being forced to confront his own biases, his own behavior, and the consequences of his actions. The room fell into a quiet lull as the final terms were reviewed. There were some back-and-forth discussions, a few minor points to hash out, but Clara could feel the confidence in her decisions growing with each passing minute. This wasn't just about the deal, it was about setting the tone for everything that came after it. She wasn't just fighting for her company's future. She was fighting for her right to be respected on her own terms. Finally, after what seemed like hours of deliberation, they were almost there. The terms were almost set in stone. Clara's company would receive the full investment and the partnership would be established. But there was still one last thing to address. We've covered all the major points, Clara said, her voice calm but firm. But I want to make sure that we're clear about one thing. My company won't tolerate any discrimination. I've worked too hard to get to this point, and I will not allow anyone to undermine me or my team. If there's any doubt about that, now is the time to speak up. The room went quiet again. Clara's words hung in the air like a challenge. She wasn't just trying to secure a deal. She was drawing a line in the sand, making it clear that she was going to be treated with the same level of respect as any other CEO in the room. There was a brief pause before William spoke again. "Clara, I understand," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I know we've had some bumps along the way, but I want to assure you that we are fully committed to this partnership. I understand the importance of trust, and I won't let you down." Clara studied him for a moment, weighing his words. She had heard promises before, but this time something felt different. There was no bravado in his voice now, no defensiveness. There was just a simple acknowledgement of the reality of the situation. Clara nodded. "That's what I needed to hear." The rest of the meeting moved smoothly from there. The final clauses were signed, the deal was officially closed, and Clara's company had secured the investment. But even as the signatures were being added to the papers, Clara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the financial gain. It was about the way she had stood her ground. About how she had ensured that her voice was heard, that her worth was acknowledged, and that no one, not even the most powerful bank manager in the room, could take that away from her. As the meeting wrapped up, William stood and extended his hand to Clara. This time there was no hesitation in his gesture. He knew what he had to do. He knew that this handshake was more than just a formality. It was a recognition of everything that had come before it and everything that Clara represented. "I look forward to working together, Clara," he said. His words were simple, but they carried weight now. "You've earned this, and I'm glad we could come to an agreement." Clara took his hand firmly, her grip strong. "I look forward to it as well, William. But remember, respect is always the foundation." The deal had been made. Clara had secured the future of her company, but more than that, she had solidified her place in the corporate world. She had shown that she wouldn't back down, that she was more than capable of standing up for herself, her mother, and the people who had supported her all along. As they left the room, Clara felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with the money or the deal. It was a pride in knowing that, in that moment, she had taken control. She had set the tone. And now the world would have to follow. Evelyn Carter sat quietly by the window of her small living room, holding a cup of tea she had already forgotten to drink. The late afternoon light came in softly, touching the framed family photos on the wall. From the outside, everything looked calm. But inside her heart, the events of the past few days still felt heavy. She had lived a long life. She had seen struggle, loss, and hard-earned joy. Yet the moment at the bank stayed with her in a way she did not expect. Not because of anger, but because of how small it made her feel for a brief second. She had not cried that day. She had not raised her voice. She had simply picked up her ID, thanked the teller who looked ashamed, and walked out with her head held high. But dignity, even when protected, can still ache. Marcus visited her that evening. He did not arrive in a luxury car or with assistance. He came alone, carrying a bag of groceries like he always did. To the world, he was a powerful CEO. To Evelyn, he was still her son. They sat together at the kitchen table. Marcus noticed her silence and did not rush her. He had learned patience from her. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't tell you so you could do anything," she said softly. "I just needed you to know," Marcus nodded. "I know, Mom." He did not speak about the deal. He did not speak about money or consequences. Instead, he listened as she explained how confused she felt in that moment, how surprised she was by the disrespect, and how quickly it happened. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest, but he did not show it. He had already made his decision, not out of anger, but out of principle. The next morning, news quietly moved through corporate circles. The $5 billion partnership had been awarded to another bank. No press conference, no public drama. Just a firm decision made behind closed doors. For the bank that lost the deal, the shock was deep. Years of preparation, months of meetings, and endless projections vanished in a single day. Inside the bank, executives worked quickly to control the damage. Apologies were drafted, policies were reviewed, training programs were announced, but everyone knew the truth. None of it would have mattered if respect had been shown from the beginning. Richard Hale packed his office in silence. There were no speeches, no defenses. He avoided eye contact with coworkers who once laughed at his jokes and praised his confidence. The building felt colder now. He replayed the moment again and again in his mind, wishing he could take it back. Not because of the deal, but because he finally understood the weight of what he had done. One careless act had cost him his position, his reputation, and the trust he thought he deserved. But the story did not end with his fall. It ended with something quieter, something stronger. A week later, Evelyn received a letter. It was written carefully, filled with formal words and apologies. The bank admitted fault. They expressed regret. They asked for forgiveness. Evelyn read it slowly, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She did not feel victory. She felt closure. Later that day, Marcus took her to lunch at a small restaurant she loved. No one recognized him. No one stared. They talked about memories, about her late husband, about the garden she planned to fix in the spring. Laughter returned easily. Life moved forward. What Evelyn did not know was how many people her quiet strength had reached. Within Marcus's company, the story spread, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Managers spoke to their teams about respect, about how titles mean nothing without humanity, about how the way you treat someone when you think they have no power reveals who you truly are. The new bank partnership began smoothly. Meetings were professional but warm. Trust grew naturally. Marcus noticed the difference immediately. It was not just about numbers. It was about culture. One afternoon, Marcus stood in his office looking out at the city below. He thought about his mother walking into that bank with nothing but confidence and honesty. He thought about how she never asked for special treatment, never used his name, never demanded respect, yet deserved it more than anyone. True power, he realized, does not come from money or influence. It comes from character, from choosing what is right even when no one is watching, from knowing when to walk away. Evelyn, back at home, watered her plants as the sun set. She felt lighter now. Not because someone else lost something, but because she never lost herself. And somewhere between those two quiet moments, a lesson was written without shouting, without force, and without revenge. A lesson that would last far longer than any deal ever could.